Hello everyone, welcome to Jaji Technologies. Today I will show you how to set up web interface and read data. Before explaining the need of the topic, it is important to understand what are web APIs. APIs, short for Application Programming Interface. Like any other interface, it allows interactions. In the case of an API, it allows interactions between softwares, applications, and servers by following a set of standards and protocols in order to share features, information, and data. So a web API is nothing but an application programming interfaces that are accessed over the web, which can be used where software systems need to interact with each other over the internet. In this image, you can see that there are several HTTP request methods such as get, post, put, patch, and delete. I will explain this method as we progress through the video. Let me explain you what is a web API gateway before showing you how to create web interface and read data. A web API gateway, also known as API gateway, is like a traffic cop for the web APIs, directing traffic between client applications and multiple backend services. When a client sends a request to access an API, the gateway receives the request and routes it to the appropriate backend service. In addition to routing requests, the API gateway provides features such as security. I hope you have understood my explanation and found it useful. So I'm going to use one of the most common examples of a good API, which is the weather APIs that provide real-time weather data for various locations. So by using this API, you can access the data you need without having to build your own weather data system from scratch. Here are the steps to configure a web API gateway in Insys Suite. Take a sample web API key. To illustrate, I will use the Weather API application to generate a specific key that will enable me to access its service and retrieve weather data. Step 2. Create Web API Gateway in Insys Suite. Step 3. Create PCS tags where the data is received in the Insys Suite. I hope you have watched the other videos on how to upload the tags in Insys Suite. Step 4. Select the Web API Gateway, assign value source name and value gateway ID. Step 5. Enable the data scan request. Upon logging in with the correct credentials, one can now access the Insys Administrator portal, which will immediately display a similar admin dashboard. This dashboard offers a quick summary of the comprehensive system at one glance. After logging in, navigate to the Data Source section and choose Web Gateways from the drop-down menu. So for the demonstration, I have named and described the Web API Gateway as Weather API Test. To explain on other key features of the gateway, I will need an API key. To illustrate this, I will be using the Weather API application to generate a unique key that will grant me access to its service and allow me to retrieve weather data. Weather API application is free and you can call up to 1000 APIs with a single account. Copy the API key and go to API Explorer. Click on Show Response and it will generate a URL. To test the Web API key, I am using Postman, an API development platform for testing the Web API keys, and using HTTP request as GET to fetch the data. In an API query, the base URL is the initial part of the URL that remains constant throughout the request, while the fixed query string is the part of the URL that contains parameters and their values which remain constant for each request. The base URL includes the domain name and the path to the endpoint that you want to access. For example, in the URL, the base URL is the weatherapi.com and consider everything except base URL as fixed query string. Now, to send a request using Postman, specify the HTTP request method as GET and the URL body and click on Send. Postman will then wait and display the response from the API, which includes the information from the weather API. To transfer the data from the third-party application like the weather API to Insys DSI and convert into Insys PCI field, As mentioned earlier, it is necessary to specify the gateway key features such as base URL, fixed query string, response type, and is enabled. Afterwards, the data from the displayed response panel can be read and transferred to instance. Now, once you have entered the necessary information, including the domain name in the base URL, parameters and their corresponding values in the fixed query string, Insys offers two methods for transmitting data between different software applications over the internet or presenting it in a structure format, namely JSON and XML. The choice between these two formats will ultimately depend on the specific needs of the application. Before configuring the PCS tags for the data to receive in the institute, you have to turn on is enabled option and save the gateway. You will notice a new field called tag for testing. By using the tag for testing field, the gateway will send a test signal to the device to verify that the communication path is operational. This is important because without a successful connection, data cannot be transmitted between the device and the gateway, and ultimately the system will not function properly. In order to verify if communication has been established, I will read one of the parameters that is displayed on the response panel of the Weather API application. For instance, to obtain the temperature in degrees Celsius, use the object name as current and specify the parameters as temperature underscore C. If the connection is successfully established in the gateway, we will be able to read the current data. Hope you have watched the video on how to upload PCS tags. We have a tag template created for the web API. Choose tags and from the drop-down menu, select Weather API tags. In the tag configuration, choose value gateway ID as Weather API test gateway. Use value source name as tag name and enable the data scan request afterwards. Thank you.